Hello, hello, hello. Um, Hello, welcome to Curious Questions, I guess. I don't know what this is gonna be. I kind of just wanted a place where I let my curiosity get the better of me. And I delve into like simple questions, but research quite deeply, if that makes sense. Um, the first episode, this episode, I guess, episode, if there are gonna be episodes, is gonna be a specific question that I thought of while I was eating some food. And I think this specifically was like chicken, and I went to Tesco's and I bought a Tesco meal deal and I looked at the macros and I was like, hold on a minute. There is such different portions. No, I don't want to say such different portions, but a chicken tikka sandwich, I don't know. Um, from one sandwich to another sandwich is quite different, right? So in my head, I'm kind of trying to explore the question of like, is the macros on the label misleading whatsoever? As in, if there is, I don't want to form any hypotheses, but that's the question. Are the macros in the labels of the foods factually correct on average throughout someone's lifetime? So I mean, let's dive straight into it. I have no actual idea, by the way. This is just something I want to explore, and I'll do it on camera. So I've created a little art profile. So we can start with literally the question as well. How accurate are the macros shown in food labels or food packets? Let's say. Guessing I'll get a little Gemini answer. So macros shown on food packets are generally reliable guides, but they're not 100% precise. By law in both the USA and the UK, food manufacturers are allowed a margin of error up to 20% for macronutrient and calorie count. I did not know that. Look at that, someone else has already made a YouTube video on it. Yeah, I did not know that. A few factors cause these numbers to be estimates rather than actual figures. Rounding rules, sure. I think 20% is kind of like, it's an interesting number because depending on, let's think about this way. Oh my god, this is bright. Let's think about it this way. Let's say that we have a label, and in that label we have protein of 20 grams, and we have carbohydrates of 13 grams, and then you have fats, you have salt. What else do you have in there? I think there's saturated fats as well, which is like a sub component. Saturated fats, you have salt, and then you have some labels show vitamins. Let's not go with that for now. Let's search up what does a food label look like. Macro label. Let's take this, copy image because this is super bright. Copy and paste it in here. Can we crop this? I think we can. Okay, let's zoom this out a little bit more. So, yeah, let's delete this. Let's look at this. So first of all, kind of ignoring this 4 servings per container, serving size 1 cup, 227 grams. Total fat 9 grams, percentage of daily value. And this daily value tells you how much a nutrient in a serving of food contributes to a daily diet. 2,000 calories a day is used for general nutrition advice. Yeah, okay, that's fair enough. So total fat is 9 grams, and saturated fat is 4.5 grams. Trans fat, I don't know what that means, is 0 grams. Cholesterol is 35 milligrams. I've not actually seen cholesterol in a packet before. Most packets that I know don't actually have this. Let's take a look at some other packets. I think let's search up UK, because I think I'm most familiar with something like this is what I'm most familiar with. We can put both labels on there. I think it might be helpful to take a look at both labels. Something they do have in common as soon as I open it up is the oh my god, this is not the color I want. Is the 2,000 calories here and the 2,000 calories here. So that's a good sign. I think like when different sources converge on the same figure, to me that's generally a good sign. It's like there is some evidence, there is some backing, or something is horribly wrong. I think in this case 2,000 calories does make sense to me specifically. So looking at the energy, fat, carbohydrate, sugars. Yeah, I forgot about sugars. Fiber. Yeah, that's the one. So my hypothesis, or like my devil's advocate brain, is working like this. Let's say you have an egg, a horrible egg, I know. Let's color it with white. Just oh my goodness me. Let's ignore my drawing skills, and let's say you have 3 eggs every single day. You wake up, you boil an egg, and you have 3 eggs every single day. This egg could have potentially 9 grams of protein. Let's say it's a boiled egg and you have 3 boiled eggs every morning. Or it could maybe have like 7 grams of protein. Or it could maybe have 11 grams of protein. Right? And how, like, this already brings up a very important question. How do we actually measure how much a macro, how much of a macro is in a certain product? Like, that is a very important question, because the measuring itself is brings about uncertainty or certainty depending on the methods. But let's say on this hypothesis, let's just go with this. What I'm envisioning is wrong pen. What I'm envisioning is, let's say this is time, and this is like each day, and then you have I don't know, the amount of protein in your body. Let's say, protein, amino acids, like let's say the amount of muscle in your body. Assuming you work out regularly, you exercise regularly, and are regenerating muscle to get that muscle. And muscle mass is basically changing as per your diet, as opposed to your activity. Let's assume that. What I'm thinking is, when you are a teenager, let's say you are you're maybe skinny, or low muscle mass, and you eat 3 eggs, and there is, let's say, 11 grams of protein. On this day, you might not feel that much of an increase, or here, or here, or here, or here. But over time, when this goes from, let's say, 1 day to, let's say, this is 7 days, and let's say this is 2 months, over time you will notice that this will go up a little bit, probably not a lot. This is, I don't like being misleading here, just a little bit, yeah. So you'll notice that it's going up, and maybe if this is 1 year and you have the same protein intake, it's gonna go up like this, right? Every single day you have 3 grams, you keep up with the same exercise routine that allows you to regenerate muscle. And kind of this is based on this 11 grams of protein. Now, if you have 9 grams of protein, what happens is ever so slightly different. You'd have this, you'd be slightly lower, slightly lower, slightly lower, still be increasing, but slightly lower. And you'd essentially have some sort of an exponential, but a little bit delayed. And the lower end of the spectrum, maybe 7 grams, would be like this. So eventually, if you have something consistently, then it will accumulate in your body. But this difference is, in my mind, a massive difference. Like, if we have if we have X amount of muscle a year in, this might be 2 years in. I know that I'm exaggerating a big amount, but this is an egg. Like I know eggs might not be that fundamental, but now let's think in scale of like 48 years, right? And I think that's pretty important. I think it's very important, in fact, that the consistency is very important, and so each little detail and is very important to our body. And so, like, how do we know which? First of all, how do we actually measure how much of a macro is in a certain product, and how do we know that how much our body actually needs? Actually know how much our body needs. So let's go back into our research. Macros shown on food packets are generally reliable guides because they're not 100% precise. By law in both, they margin them up to 20% for macronutrient and calorie counts. Does protein count as macronutrient? Protein count as macronutrient. Yes, protein is one of the 3 primary amount alongside carbohydrates and fats. Okay. And calorie counts. Okay, I will trust that for now. And food levels are permitted, while the 20% margin averages out over the course of a day. To ensure your tracking remains as accurate as possible, weigh your food, log raw ingredients, monitor your progress. So to me, this 20% is like the most interesting thing of all, because it goes back to this. It's kind of like that 20% can be a big factor in determining how well you're doing in terms of health, right? Someone who's extremely unlucky, right, with that 20% margin of error, can kind of go from, let's say, what's 11 times 80%, so 8.8 grams. Someone who's saying they're consuming 11 grams and they're actually consuming 9 grams, when they expect themselves to be at this point, at this like certain, let's say, I don't know, 75 kilos, but actually in fact this might be this, and they are at 75 kilos after a year. So this is very optimistic. This is like a very positive way of thinking about this as well. In my mind, it's kind of like you have an egg. Egg is not that important. But now if we look at things like bad things, like saturated fats, which we know are bad for the body, it's kind of it's the opposite way around. And it's very important to think about this. In my head, anyways, is you have a starting point of like your excuse me, X amount healthy, but like let's say this is percentage healthy. Let's say you're at 75%. If you get somewhat unlucky, or this saturated fat and the macros that you're told in your products are what they are is 20% less consistently. And that raises another question in my head, which is, what affects the uncertainty for, geographically? As in, what is the spread of uncertainty on food products, of macros in food products geographically? Like, these are very important questions. I don't know where this came from. I think this is a percent sign. How can I select the line? No, pencil P. Okay. And now I'm thinking, instead of going this way around, 0% is death, right? And I don't think anyone wants death. And most people don't. And I think you kind of going from 75 to 0% very quickly, right? And this could let's say this is I'm not quite sure how to explain it. That's why I'm taking a little bit of a pause. We are going from 75% to 0%, and let's say this is like the normal trajectory, with the misleading of 20%, right? This 75% healthiness, with this amount of saturated fat, it could be 20% more as well, right? And that 20% more means that people get less healthy over time, much less healthy over time. And it could mean that, the rate at which they decline their health is much sooner, and so this life expectancy is going down, and that's the very essence of life expectancy. You eat good food, you are better. You don't eat good food, you are less better, with very small outliers. But I just want to make sure that, let's say some part in America, some local part in America doesn't have a specific uncertainty of food macros, whereas in New York, the uncertainty might be like 1%, which means that the people in New York are much more well informed than the people in that local town. How much each of them cares is probably a different conversation and a different argument than should it be that different regardless of the person, because this can quickly become like a targeted kind of pipeline or supply chain issue, right? So let's copy this. Don't know why it's copied the whole thing. Okay. Let's go on this no stupid question. I love this Reddit. I love this subreddit, sorry. I read something yesterday about how calories are determined in food by dehydrating a food and putting it in a machine, essentially burning it, and measuring the output of energy to get the amount of calories, which makes sense to me. Okay. But how do they get the macros? Carbs, proteins, okay. Food scientists here, okay. Let's zoom in a little bit. For fat, you can extract it from a food sample using a non-polar solvent, since fat is... I just realized this is not being shown properly. Lol. Half of the screen was cut off. Food scientists here. For fat, you can extract it from a food sample using a non-polar solvent. Don't know what that means. Since fat is non-polar, as opposed to water, which is polar. Okay? I have heard the term polarity in somewhere before, during my GCSE and IB days, but let's just pretend I know what that is and move on. For protein, you essentially determine the amount by using analytical chemistry methods that determine the nitrogen content, and then using different calculations can determine the amount of protein in the food. Okay, so for protein, you determine the amount by using analytical chemistry methods that determine the nitrogen content and determine the amount of this is very vague, but this is because out of all the macros, only protein contains nitrogen. Oh, interesting. Carbs are usually determined by subtraction, total food minus fat, protein and water, but for specific carbs and sugars there are specific tests like chromatography. There is also a less accurate but easier to conduct method, which is using near infrared light. Each component reflects/absorbs. This method is usually paired up to chemical tests, but nearly. Okay. This is a guess. I trust this fact a lot more than I do this. Okay. Alright. So this is very interesting. Only protein contains nitrogen. So I do want to take a look at this even further. How do we measure protein content in food? Look at the nutrition. But how is that? Oh my goodness me! I need to install a Dark Reader extension. Okay, done. Boom. Okay, measuring. Let's just read the abstract. In order to determine the quantity of protein in food, it is important to have standardized analytical methods. Several methods exist that are used in different food industries to quantify protein content, including, I'm not going to try and pronounce that, and total amino acid content methods. Kejadal. I couldn't resist myself. Lowry Bradford. The correct determination of the protein content of foods is important as often as is the case with milk. It determines the economic value of the food product, and it can impact the economic feasibility of new industries for alternative protein production. Agreed, 100%. This is exactly what I'm raving on about in this video. This editorial provides an overview of the different protein determination methods and describes their advantages and disadvantages. How long is this abstract? Okay, we have a table. Let's go through each. So we have the Kjeldahl method, digestion of food with a strong digestion of food with a strong acid, so the nitrogen is released, which is then quantified using a titration technique. Okay. Standard method, therefore you compare, does not measure true protein and overestimation. A protein can result due to use of standard nitrogen correction factor 6.25. Dumas method, fast and does not use chemicals, can measure separate, costly and is not very accurate, highly error prone. The problem is that what I see is I don't see one that says, hey, this is accurate. I might be wrong. I mean, I don't want to take up the time and read this whole paper. This is what Claude is for. Or ChatGPT. Let's see. Are these all lie? Do you all try it first? Nope. Apparently not. You have to log in. Great. Let me just switch to okay. So can you read this and verify the strongest method to compute protein amount in food? What is the accuracy of that method? How can we verify it's accurate? what is the uncertainty level in the measurement? Okay, let's see. Let's see what Claude comes back with. Good article, thanks, mate. It's a clear breakdown, strong direct amino acid analysis, right? And this one was the first one, if I was not wrong. Oh no, it's this one. Accurate. I did not see this accurate. Initial investment in HPLC equipment required. Hydrolysis step required. Time consuming. Okay. While the corn it's actually pretty bad at measuring true protein. Overestimates protein content in foods like cod by between 40 to 70. What is the control in this? That's what I don't understand. Like, how do they get to this 40 to 71%? The only other way to get to that is HPLC, right? So I guess this is. Let's ask. How do you even verify that? What is the control? Sorry, what is the control of the protein? How can you say that it is 40% or 70%? Inaccurate without having a initial reference or a super high accurate method of measuring the protein in the first place. Let's see. Mate, thank you. so sycophantic. Essentially asking what's the ground truth, and it touches to a degree. HPLC amino acid analysis is the reference, not the absolute truth. When the paper says that's relative to HPLC amino acid analysis. Direct amino acid, HPLC, it measures the actual chemical entities, individual amino acids, rather than inferring protein from a proxy like nitrogen. Okay, that makes sense. This makes sense to me. This kind of answers my question. You sum the amino acids directly, so you're counting what's actually there. Certified reference materials with known amino acid concentrations exist, allowing you to validate instrument response. HLP error sources, the acid breaking and destroy some amino acids, particularly trigo. But what is the error sources? But what is the certainty? Yes, exactly. What's the example? In practice, is a reproducibility of roughly 5 to 10% plus or minus. So this is where I'm at, right? So this 5 to 10% is based on HPLC, and I know I just went off of one paper, and maybe there's another paper as well. Occasional method, method. It is not helping break down any more than this. Explain like I'm 5. Isolating this math based on how much I say 15% by the chemical. Yeah, like this can be very much manipulated in my eyes. Yes, please. The weight gain is the fat content of the chips. Okay. It's actually determined by literally incinerating it. This makes sense as well. Yeah, I think HPLC seems to be the go-to. I mean, especially for, I want to say, proteins. But like, okay, HPLC is a nice basis, and that 5 to 10% inaccuracy that I see there. Now, like there is not just a. So you have two types of inaccuracies now. So you have the inaccuracy when you are examining the actual food, let's say. So you have plus or minus 5 to 10%. And in my eyes, companies that want to market their food will choose probably plus 10% results for their branding, for whatever it is. So you already have the plus 10% coming from the lab, right? And then this is the difference to, let's say, basis of 0%. And then you have a 20% allowance, right? So this is like scientifically somewhat verified results that and then you have 20% on top of that, which you're allowed to be off by, right? So then this is kind of like, if I do 100 times 10% times 20%, it's 100 times 10% times 20%. 20% is 2. Am I doing that right? No, sorry. So it can't be times. It is literally adding on the sum. So you have 100, and then you have 10% inaccuracy from the lab, which results in 110 as your control, and then you have 110 plus 20% inaccuracy that you are allowed legally. So then you have 130% legality. So here the problem is that plus or minus 5, you can also go the other way, which is 100, right? Minus 10%, which is equal to 90%, and then legally you can be 20% off of the scientific thing that you've shown. So minus 20% is equal to 70%. So you can be, so companies or food products that you can buy. So this is kind of what I wanted to get at was 70% to 130% is the boundary, essentially, maximum boundary. And I'm sure that this follows somewhat of a, and I'm being optimistic here, somewhat of a normal distribution where a lot of the food is here, and one standard deviation to the left, or the majority of the food is going to be here, majority of the food is going to be accurate. But this is something that we can't discount. Let's say this is where 70% inaccuracy comes from, this is where 130% inaccuracy comes from. We can't discount this part because it's still like quite a significant part of that inaccuracy. And I think, to me, that becomes a problem when something like someone is marketing based on macros, because you can let's say you have saturated fats and you have protein. Let's say you have 100 grams of protein in a product and you have 50 grams of saturated fat in a product. We can actually market this as is 50 times 0.7. You can market this as 35 grams, and you can market this as 130, or not percent, 130 grams, right? So this instantly seems a lot better than this does. And this is where I'm kind of coming from, is how accurate are the macros in food? Like, no idea. And I think this is also one of the reasons why I guess it's important to identify natural versus processed foods, because processed foods are things that are literally have the macros or the nutrients put into there to a specific amount. Like these are measured, researched. I don't want to say lab grown, but somewhat lab grown, to be of specific macros, such that they can be marketed at specific macros. And pretty much that's the case. And this is being very pessimistic. This is going down the conspiracy theory route. This is going down the route saying, hey, you know what? Maybe the people selling us food aren't actually selling us the right amount of food. They just want to make money, which is not such a unbold assumption to make. But regardless, the point I'm trying to make is that the level of inaccuracy in food products does matter, and it is important. And the point of this video was to be curious and to see if there is somewhat of a controversy in that. And I think I've become curious enough to go down this rabbit hole of what is the range of inaccuracy that you can probably see, that you can somewhat justify from a company or food company, food supply chain perspective, and it is that. And it's kind of the question of natural and processed foods came because natural food, you kind of now almost some natural foods are even processed, to be honest, but you can have some assurance that natural foods will stay within a certain limit in terms of macros. Like it's much harder to get an apple and say, hey, there is 10 grams of protein in this when there's only 8. That might be the case, but because it's an apple, it's natural, and it's really difficult to be like, there's this amount of protein, this is really good for you. It's really hard to market it as that, and it's like I really like the essence of like natural is healthy, because that's how we've essentially evolved. And I'm going down another rabbit hole. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is that be careful of these values. They may not always be accurate. This carbohydrate might be solid 55 grams. These calories, I think calories are quite, you don't have that initial 10% of leeway, so 20%, so this could be a solid 2200. Oh, sorry, this is average adult, so this could be a solid 120. Basically just question stuff. Be curious. Bye bye.